How's the wedding though, dude?
The wedding was fantastic, dude.
Here's the thing that's like the craziest thing about weddings ever is that not only are you getting married, you're also telling the world who your best friends are in what order, literally in what order. You know what I mean?
The other thing too is it's a pretty good marker of who has more friends. The wife has like a ton of friends. You know, she has 15 close friends. And she's
Right.
like, I can't cut anyone. You know, this is going to be friendship ruining if I cut this person. And then the groom is standing there being like, do I even know 15 dudes?
Totally. Where are my two
Let
friends
alone
from
my
college?
friends, dude. I'm going to invite my colleague, Ben, you know.
Yeah.
Speaking patterns break the code. Pre-trained pod.
Welcome back to the Pre-Trained Pod. I'm Pierce.
And I'm Rich.
Richard, I hear you've been working out more.
Yeah, who told you that, dude?
It's just people are talking. The grapevine. Maybe
2
even your
seconds
gym
ago.
coach. I don't want to say names.
So I don't know if people know this, but I handed in my thesis about 2 weeks ago. And then I saw this PT at the gym. His name's Nick. And I was like, Nick, I handed in my thesis. We're going to be here another at least 3 months in London. I just kind of want to get like super, super buff in the next 3 months. What can you do for me, boss? And so he hands me this like program that he made for me. And dude, like I'm literally in pain all over. He looked at my form and all the lifts. And he was like, oh, I noticed that you need to be more explosive. So let me start getting you to run actual drills that football players run in like high school and college. And so I'm doing like A skips. I'm doing B skips. I'm doing hurdles. I'm doing the whole thing, dude. This is going to be the pre-trained
Swole show.
workout training
That's
podcast.
right.
Exactly. I feel like
That's
there's a
right.
market for that, dude. You know what I mean? Just like at the gym recording a podcast about LLMs.
Hey,
Not crazy.
the AI crossover with the weightlifting community is surprisingly strong.
Yeah, surprisingly strong.
I mean that non-ironically. I feel like there's very much this whole bid in SF right now around the 996, which is like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Also 6 days a week, which I have my own thoughts about.
It's a program.
But
It's true.
that really does intersect with this founder persona that's in the gym. They're trying to lift heavy. They're trying to eat clean, you know?
I feel like sneaky when people say 996, a lot of it is just like fronting and trying to put out this like persona of you as like a masculine tough guy. You know what I mean? Like
I would like to be working. I am willing to prioritize work for 12 hours a day.
I would do that. Whether or not I actually do it is beside
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I want to be the guy who does. Well, Richard, speaking of people who almost certainly prioritized a 996 schedule for this past week, I feel like some people on Twitter were saying that the next month and a half was going to be a horrible time for startups to announce any new product or any new fundraise because they were just going to get so overshadowed by the big frontier labs.
Yeah.
And I feel like so far that's proved pretty true. We're just in the past week, you had huge announcements coming out of OpenAI, Anthropic. We have some long tail of startups that we're also going to talk about today. Specifically, OpenAI released Sora II. Anthropic dropped Sonnet 4.5. There were some rumors around OpenAI's new N8N automation competitor.
Crazy week. Absolutely
Really crazy
insane.
week.
I know, dude. Yeah. I literally spent probably maybe like 10 hours cumulatively this week on Sora and just reading up on Claude 4.5.
Well, Richard, if anyone was living under a rock this past week, Sora came out, which is both the model and the app.
Well, Sora 2.
That's right. We can maybe break that down separately. But Sora 2 is OpenAI's latest video generation engine. It's also, as far as I know, the first one that's really generally available. They had previously bundled Sora 1 with the more expensive ChatGPT memberships, but this Sora is accessible to anyone. They bundled it into a new app that's on the App Store as a standalone that's separate from ChatGPT. It works like how you'd expect a photo generation app to work at this point. You give it some prompt, it runs inference for a few minutes, it outputs a 10-second long video doing exactly what you asked it for in the prompt. A few upgrades that I noticed that jump out: being able to output audio right in line with the video. So instead of having to add it after the fact, which was true for some of these video generation models, which had no audio, it will actually give you a full featured clip with audio too. And then also being able to upload a photo of your face and then render yourself and your friends right in the video.
Your likeness. I think that's what they're calling it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Likeness. And then you can cameo with other people, which is you actually put them within your B-roll. You know, I happened to be scrolling through my Sora feed, you know, as the latest social media app, and saw a lot of videos with you in it, Richard. Which
that's
makes
what
me
I'm saying. I've been spending
some of those 10
on this
hours
thing,
were
dude.
you making videos.
100%. I mean, frankly, let me be clear. half of those 10 hours were probably spent just waiting on Sora to generate the videos because it is like very slow right now. I guess just because like the servers are being really pushed to their max because everyone's on this freaking thing. But it's cool, man. I think it's one of these applications where the model is really cool, but the thing that's cooler even is the UX built around it. How you capture likeness is a really interesting UX feature. How you tag your friends in these videos to generate their face in the video that you want to generate. That's really cool. How you scroll through the feed, I guess is what they would call it. That's also really cool.
Do you want to say more about exactly how you capture your likeness? Because I thought that was a standout functionality where they're obviously trying to balance people onboarding others who are not themselves in it. So you have some necessary, almost like KYC safeguards that they want to build.
Yeah. So the way it works is, I think right now it's invite only. So I got an invite from my buddy who's in the know, typed in the invite code, and then the first thing that happens is it basically says, hey, can we record your likeness? And so I've already given all of my data to the internet gods. So at this point, take my likeness. What is left?
You already have my likeness.
You have my likeness. So you sit there with your phone. It's like when you set up Face ID on your iPhone. It's a little different though, where you get the set of numbers that they ask you to say. So it's like, say 47, 59, 63. So you say those numbers, you look at it for a second, and then you just tilt your head to the left, to the right, and then down. And then that's it. Boom. It takes maybe, I don't know, 10 seconds. How long did it take you?
15 seconds. It takes much longer to process once you're done with it than it does to actually record the video.
It's fast. I mean, it's faster than Face ID, I think. When you have to like tilt your head and rotate it around like this for Apple, I think this was actually a smoother, faster experience.
I think they're also not mapping the 3D points onto your face. Like Face ID is part of its onboarding process. Part of what they do is they map some infrared or some like non-visible dot array onto your face. So they're able to then cross-correlate things in physical space and then retrieve a mesh mapping.
Even when it's like dark, you can still use the Face ID mode. You know what I mean?
I think this is just a video. They're literally just capturing video of you saying the numbers and then your face turning, and then they're feeding that into whatever their modeling engine is behind the scenes.
Exactly. So now that you have your likeness, you can see it in the app. And then the next thing that you can do is you can add friends. So the person who invited you, I think by default gets added to your friend list. And you then officially have their likeness as well. So you can choose who you share your likeness with. I think by default, you share your likeness with your friends, but you can choose who you want to share it with. It can even be public, but it's kind of psycho. And then once others have your likeness, so if your friends have your likeness, then they can just go at, Pierce Freeman or at Richard Deal Martinez and include you in their video. So they can be like, at Richard Deal Martinez eating a gyro with at Pierce Freeman in a Brooklyn bodega. And it'll generate that. And then because it has our likeness, it basically has it as context to the model. And then the two people actually end up looking like us. In some cases, like exactly like that person. I think my likeness is like, okay. Your likeness, I think, is better. My friend Ruse has a really good one where you actually see the video and not only does it look like him, it literally sounds like him. I guess like the numbers that you say also add like a sound likeness to your likeness. So the audio that's produced sounds like the person who would produce it. So
that's probably the most shocking part of the likeness for me.
I agree. Yeah,
because
I agree
there's just not that much signal there. I mean, you're literally saying the numbers, like 15, 16. It's a randomized sequence in order to make it unique to that onboarding sequence. So it's harder to mimic for someone else. For comparison, if you try to do that with 11 Labs or Descript or some of these apps that have this functionality built in to create some audio representation of you that you can then repurpose to other things, they'll make you read a couple paragraphs. And part of that, again, is for this authenticity that they're trying to solve for. You want to verify that. But I think the other part of it is just they want to get more examples of your sound data, of you saying different things. And just these three numbers, it's uncanny. It's definitely within the uncanny valley, like it's easy to tell at this point that these are Sora videos and that it's particularly Sora audio. But the fact that they can generate that with only three numbers is insane to me.
It's wild, dude. I mean, the craziest thing about this app, as said, is the user experience. It works so seamlessly out of the box, unlike basically most other AI applications or products. This thing really just felt like the first real fun consumer software product that has come out of a lab, like in a way that's actually engaging and super fun. I think when chat came out, it was engaging and fun, but in a way that was like, it awoke our like intellectual curiosity where I was like, whoa, I really want to see what this thing does. This was just straight up fun. It's just fun to scroll and see your friends making dumb videos. It's like that dopamine kick you get I've never gotten that from like an AI product before in the same way. I was giggling, dude. I was geeking. It was so fun. Like when, especially the first day when we were like playing around with what it can do. It's hilarious to see it generate a likeness of you that's 85% you, but then it'll make you say something ridiculous.
Totally.
It's just hilarious. It's just super well done.
I think they really cracked this code on it not being perfect and you consuming this content not because it's perfect, but because it's just fun. You know,
Yeah,
like
totally.
I think everyone was very much the techno optimists among us were saying there's obviously going to be some future steady state where most of what we consume as content day to day is just AI generated. It's like
Yeah.
your personalized nude feed, as if you took TikTok and you made that hyper specific to just what you would want that no one has ever filmed before. It's like that level of specificity is quote unquote obviously where we're headed. But I think this shows that there's actually a little bit more to it as a social media equation where even if it's not perfect, maybe it's actually better that it's not perfect. Like it could get eerie if you're really generating videos with you and your friends that are truly real. But the fact that there's this element of, oh, you know, this is not quite like us. I obviously know that this is AI generated, but we're just doing ridiculous things makes it much more social in a way that another model maybe would not have been able to do the same kind of way. I also thought that if they did a fine tuning job or if they did some other kind of modeling that allows you to use these likenesses, that very much wasn't in Sora 1. That's a net new feature that they've added to Sora 2. It seemed very clever to me. And I haven't really seen another video model, including like VO3 from Google, that is able to compete on that feature, even though it's competing on the quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that this is accessible to everyone is insane. Like they're doing something really tricky behind the scenes to make it not super expensive for everyone. Because obviously, I mean, you were saying that Sora 1 was like $100 right before.
Bundled in the $100 membership. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just not doable. No one's going to pay that much just to have Sora. But this is affordable. Everyone can actually have this. And it's a fun social media as well. Like it's actively just replicating TikTok. I think that to me was like the biggest innovation here was that you could make AI feel like a social media. Like you could bundle this tool into a social media platform, you know?
Yeah, totally. Maybe it's worth talking or speculating wildly about how exactly they've trained this behind the scenes. The fact that they have this likeness functionality and you can add an arbitrary amount of people into the video kind of makes me feel like there is some input token sequence that itself is multimedia, much like how you can give chat or Anthropic both text and images right now.
Yeah.
I wonder almost whether or not they are doing that same thing for the model. Because if I step back and think how I would probably train something like this as a V1, assuming it's not an emergent property of some other pre-training that they've done, which is possible, I would say, let's pre-train a video generation, so the spatio-temporal model, or just like a transformer, on all these videos, crawl social media, crawl the archives, crawl YouTube, train this really good pre-trained video model, and then say, well, we have alignment criteria of this model. Maybe even we take videos and then pass them through some video transcription model that narrates what's happening in the scene, what are people saying, et cetera, stuff some context, also extract the faces of people. If it's a video that includes faces, you put that in the context window too. And then that becomes this recipe for synthetically generating training data. Since you already have the output that you want, the key is just how do we take that ground truth output, reverse engineer what the inputs that we want users to be able to provide to the system are, and then train that as the model relationship that we want to do at inference time.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we know it's a diffusion model, right? So I think it's going to be learning on a bunch of data in an autoencoder kind of style. I don't know if they're doing like a transformer, like autoregressive generative modeling approach here. And I'm saying diffusion because we know that Sora 1 was a diffusion model, right?
Well, I think transformer you can also train in a diffusion-based inference context, right?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying like a generative kind of like next frame prediction.
Not necessarily.
task.
I mean,
Okay,
it could be. I wouldn't rule out that maybe that's how part of it's trained, but just trying to set it up so that there is some transformer head which is able to attend to the input sequence, which is like the stuffed context of what you want the scene to be, and then also the participants that you want in the scene. And then the output, whether autoregressive or as a diffusion, just iterated over these multiple steps, generates you that cohesive output.
Yeah, what I'm guessing is that they have their existing models already, so they're probably going to be doing some cross-attention thing. They're going to be training a video encoder model and then also use the embeddings from GPT as like text embeddings, and then learn some clip style cross attention module to combine these two things together. That seems most cost effective to me.
Do you think that would give them the necessary fidelity? Because one thing that I was really surprised of is that the default model cuts to different scenes. So I guess if you don't narrate a specific scene by scene breakdown, it will just default 2-3 different cuts into the scene. So
Yeah,
like,
that's a good
it'll
question.
do one talking head, it'll spin out, it'll do another talking head. Like,
here's the thing about that. I think what's actually happening behind the scenes is that there's really careful and very curated prompt engineering that's happening, where when you type in Pierce hanging out with a dolphin, it's not actually going to feed that to the model. It's actually going to feed that to its own GPT model. And that GPT model, what it'll do is expand your initial input into a longer, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs that are then fed to the actual model. There's a process where it takes in a very brief user input, because typically the inputs that we give are like, what, 10 words, maybe 15 words? And it'll transform that into like an actual sonnet, like maybe 2 pages worth of text that'll feed the model, where presumably it might be like adding in different shots of the camera artificially, right? As part of this prompt expansion, where it'll say, okay, first show a dolphin, then show Pierce, then show Pierce hugging this dolphin or whatever.
if anyone has me on Sora, please generate this and put it in the comments. I want to
Exactly. The second thing I wanted to mention, which is very important, is that in their initial release for Sora 1, what they said was that the big innovation here was that they didn't crop videos when they were training into a square 256 by 256 square like most other video generating models did back then. Rather, they were just feeding in the entire video in its original fidelity and its original dimensions as input directly to the model. And this might also help the model learn a more general understanding of how video is generally structured. The fact that typically you'll have an establishing shot, then you'll have a close-up, then you'll have another close-up. Like, they were just feeding all of this data into the model without any pre-processing. And so presumably the video that comes out also is a little bit more akin to what we're used to seeing in like cinematic movies, or I don't know, I guess YouTube videos.
I think you could tell the quality of these models. Like the recent frontier batch of video generation models are so much higher quality.
Oh, they're so crisp. Yeah.
And crispness is like a little bit hard to quantify in some ways. Like I've seen really crisp 720p footage and I've seen fuzzy 4K footage. Like you can scale up an image or a video to whatever size you want. Crispness is some quality of like the pixels and like how detailed you're able to render one pixel to the next one. But the new batch of models that are recording at least 780p are so crisp. You can see so many details. And to me, I think that also probably gives the model a decent amount of contextual knowledge about what's going on that it might actually not really be able to see on a much smaller pixel density. I'm thinking for the details in shots, you're recording a nature scene. And when we're recording it on our smartphone, that's recording in 1080p or 4K. So if you play it back, you'll see, oh, the leaves are rustling. The deer is trampling on these leaves and they're crackling. There's actually nuance in the video that is captured by virtue of it being high definition. And if you really compress that down, you're not just losing quality that we would want when we get it as output, but you're actually losing some information signal.
Yeah, about like physics, I guess, right? Like you're losing information about the subtle effects of wind on leaves or how things glisten on water, this sort of stuff. Yeah.
Literally. And I think resolution here also speaks, in my mind, or draws parallels to the scale that we saw with some of these photo generation models, where I think it was probably a GAN architecture that was trained 8-10 years ago at this point, but it was one of the original face reconstruction models that could generate you synthetic faces, right? And it was something like a 50 by 50 pixel image, just grayscale, right? Because the more that we add these dimensionalities, the more that we add color, that's going to be another dimension. If you add opacity or alpha, that's going to be another dimension. That increases your tensor size significantly. And then you blow it up in X and Y coordinates, that's even going to blow it up even more.
So yeah, because I guess people usually think of these images as like an X and Y coordinates, but really there's the depth coordinate, which I guess would be the color or the intensity. Well, I guess color would be another axis, and then intensity is like a fourth axis almost. It's like this 4-dimensional cube that you're basically feeding into your model as input.
And then you stretch that for the time horizon. I think that still mostly ends up being 4D because I think you usually just compress like the RGB to like one single dimension. But regardless of exactly how you are modeling that feed forward in time, you're blowing up these parameter sizes so significantly. And it feels like we're seeing that moment within the overall escalation or speed of development of these frontier video and world models, which maybe we can spend a little bit of time talking about. Because 2 years ago, these were like really small, they were funky, the dynamics very much weren't there. And clearly the scaling laws that we have for text are also holding true for video. And we're seeing that same kind of dynamic where turns out, yeah, you scale up the architecture, you scale up these sizes of these inputs, and now you can generate both things that are physically well modeled, but then also generate them at like these really large output spaces, and they end up looking pretty crisp.
Dude, yeah, I feel like 2025 moving into 2026 is going to be the 2 years where we see world models actually become a thing for the first time. And this is okay, I'll put money on this. I think 2027, like maybe summer 2027, and 2 years from now, we'll be seeing video games and movies fully generated by AI that people actively like to consume.
Wow.
Like, I think so. I mean, at the scale, dude, like the Google DeepMind thing that we were looking at the other day, so good. What was it called again? I forgot.
Genie 3.
Genie, that's right. Genie 3. Dude,
Yeah.
that's 80% of the way there. Give them another like year, more data. It feels like we're really close to a world in which having a perfect physics simulating model is within reach. We're so close. And this, I think, just underscores that. If we blend these two things together, Genie 3, this model, the baby of the two, is basically a video game. No?
I think Genie 3 literally already is a video game. I mean, it doesn't really have a plot. You maybe have to curate the plot.
And this is what this is doing, right? Like these videos are basically plot points. They're writing a story just in terms of what you want to show when.
Well, I think one thing that's very cool about these models too is, again, operating under this assumption that it's like a transformer block-based architecture, and maybe the output is this diffusion style. But more or less, you can think of things like, okay, you're feeding in your input prompt, and then it's generating you just pixel by pixel and like audio, waveform or compressed down representations as the audio format. That also means that you can hack things to say, let's just insert a frame arbitrarily at some position, at some time point. That's going to be fixed. That's going to be locked, much like the prompt. And then we're only going to let the model iterate on frames that are around that time period. That's something that you can already do with VO3. So you can like say, here's the beginning frame, here's the middle one, and here's the end one, and we'll figure out what should be in the middle to fulfill the prompt.
Yeah, like it interpolates basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Implicitly, that's what Genie 3 is doing, because it's generating you the next frame from what came before in a logically coherent way. So you can swap in whatever frame you want at any point in time, and it will continue to forward past that. Number one, that's the exact play dynamic that you would get with a video game. And two, what I've seen some people do online in this creator sphere is actually generate like a turn-by-turn game interaction with a branching decision tree where the videos will flow from one another seamlessly based on what you decide to do. Because if you think about a game, kind of like an RPG, as like this decision tree of you take some action, you can either take the side quest or not take the side quest.
Yeah.
And then the side quest is
bunch
like
of if statements.
Yeah, it's a ton of freaking if statements.
Right.
That's how like most game engines are implemented. At least like story-based game engines are like kind of implemented.
Is it actually just if statements? I guess this is probably structured in like a graph almost. There's probably
I think it's specifically a graph. But you can compile down the graph to a bunch of if statements.
Right.
Because you have those if statements and you know where they're going to lead, you can actually pre-compile the whole flow of what these stories are going to be, depending on which paths you take through the graph. It gets computationally very expensive because that means
it's
that
literally exponential.
It's literally exponential.
Yeah.
But if you did that in real time and you take that dynamic of just taking the previous frame and then plugging it forward for whatever you decide to do next, I think that there's a lot of like cool storytelling potential that you can do where you're like playing someone else's story in bounds of what their vision is, but then actually what you do within this game is up to you.
It's kind of up to you. Yeah. The only thing you'd have to do with that is to really make sure that there's continuity between these different shots. So there has to be some like history vector almost that's stored that gets continuously updated. But I guess like we already talked about that a little bit with Genie, and I'm assuming that maybe this model here, the Sora 2 model, is probably doing something similar, where there's some sort of a vector that represents history that gets updated as you add more frames to preserve that continuity.
Do you have any concerns, Richard, about this model? I mean, I know we talked about the verification of identity that you're having to do, the fact that you have to be like, I wonder why.
No, yeah, I wanted to bring up some concerns because honestly, this is a really cool model, but in the original blog post, they do cite a couple of interesting situations that can really degrade the performance of the Sora 2 model. In particular, what I found interesting is that they have these safeguards against, like erotic content, but it's very easy, apparently, according to their initial testing, to circumvent those by throwing in like medical prompts into the context.
Okay.
So say this is like in a medical context, XYZ, right? So obviously they did this testing before releasing the model. They saw this, and then presumably it's fixed somehow. But the fact that there's these like failure modes that they have to inspect manually, it's a little worrying, right? Because what if they missed a couple? The other thing that I thought was pretty cool is that they actually report also some classifiers that they developed along with the Sora model. So what they do is they release this model, and then in the back end, they train a couple of models to act as sort of safeguards or these guardrails that classify whether the content that's being produced is erotic content or something that's not safe for consumers. And then they report actually like the classifiers themselves, how good they are, right? These like safeguards, how effective are they? And here, so they say that they have this classifier for predicting whether you're creating a photorealistic image of a child, which apparently is a little like on the edge whether you're allowed to do that or not. That classifier is 97% accurate, so it's really good at predicting when you create a photorealistic image of a child. But it's only about 69% accurate if you ask it to create a fictitious child, which is interesting. So there's a pretty big discrepancy there. They obviously also build a classifier for nudity. It's probably like the first classifier that they build, I imagine. I assume a lot of people want to test that out initially. And that classifier is over 97% accurate. So I think they're really good at removing nudity, presumably. Although it's not 100% accurate, which is interesting. I would have thought that they would want that classifier to be at least like 99.9% accurate. So the fact that they're still, 2% of the time it doesn't catch it is kind of interesting and kind of wild.
It's also like the accuracy versus like precision and recall. I think that's actually probably a more interesting or revealing number if they report on the PR bounds for like the F1 score of this, because that, in my experience, bakes in some institutional weighting of different factors where if your precision's really high, you'll usually let some bad things through. But if your recall is super high, then you're going to be blocking requests that actually are legit. So you're balancing some user trade-off versus some expectations of safety.
You're right. When I said that it's 97% accurate, it's not like 3% of the time it's letting through porn. I guess what it's saying is that when it's classifying something that is pornographic or not pornographic, it might sometimes classify something that's not nudity as being nudity and falsely rejecting that. You know what I mean? Like it's almost over safe. And so that might actually be these 3% that it's losing on accuracy might come from being over safe actually. So that's a good catch.
Yeah. These questions of guardrails, I think, is what people have really taken to calling them in the space, are pretty interesting. I know a lot of startups are coming out and have come out probably over the last like 2 years that have really tried to establish this in more of a systemic way. It kind of buckets in 3 main categories. One is things that are just deterministically bad. If you have PII data, which is personally identifiable information, usually you can actually code that in via regex patterns. Like IDs, driver's licenses usually take on some format depending on the country. So you can usually just do a search and say, hey, if there's any of this, that's bad. You can do that with names, build in some like named entity recognition. That's kind of one bucket. Another one is you actually feed that input into another model. So you basically would be including the user's query and asking a frontier model like GPT-5 and say, hey, GPT-5, the user's asked me to do this. Is this okay?
Yeah, should I do this?
Should I do this? With, you as the model builder curating, this is okay, this is not okay, this is an example of what's okay. The nice thing about that is it's super flexible. It can evolve over time pretty easily because you're just modifying the prompt. The bad thing is it has the same kind of issues with potentially users jailbreaking that model and making it say it's okay, even though it's not. So then the third bucket, which is what they actually did here, is this area of training a discrete model that takes in some input and just does this one task.
That's like a really simple model at the end of the day.
Yeah. Which we talked about Anthropic doing, I think, for like nuclear security related data. So there's this like fusion of all these different approaches that together we hope will unlock some amount of safety or security over these models. But
it feels like it's very duct tape. It feels like they probably have like 100 of these little. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's not yet at least one approach that really rules them all.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, speaking of another frontier model, one that potentially you could give some of these safeguard tasks, Sonnet 4.5 came out, which is Anthropic's latest frontier model.
Yeah, the big one.
This is a big one. Interesting at this point, right now, this is obviously their latest and greatest model. They have 3 otherwise frontier models that they released that are modern on their API. One is Haiku 3.5. The middle one, it's kind of this Goldilocks trio. The middle one is Sonnet 4.5, and then the big one is Opus 4. And that was pretty interesting to me just at the get-go, that we actually have 3 different versions now of architectures depending on the size. And to me, reading a little into it, it speaks to the fact that all frontier labs are limited on GPU capacity. You need to dedicate your efforts to training one model at the expense of another one. And it seems like the fact that Sonnet is so ahead of these other ones, especially Haiku, that actually is the one that has best had product market fit of balancing this cost to quality trade-off that you really want all models to do. And it seems like they've really hit the nail on the head with the size of Sonnet for what they're able to host it for.
You ever use Opus?
I use Opus as part of Claude Code because it's bundled. I'll use it sometimes as part of Claude.ai when I'm talking to the web interface. But in my own personal projects where I have to pay for GPU access at a per token level, almost never Opus.
Never, right? Yeah, me neither. Okay,
and I mean, the latest scorecard showed that Sonnet is now outperforming Opus on a lot of benchmarking tasks too. So it seems like Opus won't be too far behind, but at least for the time being, Sonnet is almost state of the art in pretty much every tier that they quantified it on.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a play here to just only release Sonnet, to say, hey, look, like Opus is just like really big. Maybe it's like almost as good as Sonnet. We could make it better if we just trained it for longer, but there's just maybe not good product market fit here. Let's double down on this medium-sized model because that is this right Goldilocks zone that people like. What do you think about that?
I think that wouldn't be a bad take, assuming that they don't use Opus for anything internally. Because I think it's very possible that Opus could actually be a knowledge distillation model for Sonnet.
Oh,
and if you don't have one that's even bigger, you wouldn't get the kind of quality data or like training curriculum to train Sonnet on in a way that Sonnet ends up being better because of it.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, makes sense.
But at least for the product market fit, I think some people online really like using it as much as you can be opinionated about models and opinionated about models that are within one given architecture family, which I don't know if my nuance really extends quite that far, even if I have thoughts on I'll go to this frontier lab versus this one. But I know some people really like Opus. I suspect what it is too, quite honestly, is I think playing the model game often of which models you prefer and what you use in your own products, it requires so much depth of expertise and lived experience interacting with these models day to day to really make this informed decision of which one should we use. It reminds me of the old ChatGPT where it's like you can have O3 or O1 or O1 Pro or 4.0 or whatever. And then they simplified that to obviously just have 4 main frontier GPT-5s and then one model router that can go to different ones depending on the complexity of the input. I feel like if you extend that to the overall ecosystem of people that are just trying to use some model, you just want the best one. And I know that seems silly, but I think, again, for people who like aren't really in the space day to day, I do think the way that people think about it is this is the most expensive model. This one must be the best one.
Yeah, it's not crazy at all. This is just human behavior. I don't know if you know this, but apparently like iPhone sales, 70 or 80% are for Pro phones. Pro Max phones, like the best, biggest phone that is for the most niche, presumably the most niche set of users, the most pro users. It's like 80% of the market buys that. So this feels very similar. Even if it's like you're a 60-year-old retiree just trying to like make some images, you're probably going to want to use the best model, right? And it doesn't really matter if it costs like 20 cents or 50 cents, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like human time and labor is just so expensive that if this model, especially how we value our own time, that if this model can save me even 5 minutes, I'm going to do the most expensive one. I would
Sure.
rather
Yeah.
pay the money than have to waste the time, which I think is where we're at right now. So, like I said, Rich, Sonnet 4.5 pretty much outperforms all the benchmarks with a couple of exceptions. The notable takeaways for me from using it for the last few days was one, far less agreeableness, or maybe like aggressive agreeableness where the model will just say it'll be a yes man all the time. So there's much less of that. And then also some implicit awareness of its context window and when it's filling up on space to try to end or terminate some task, So
Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
previous model iterations, you would have to code in as the model builder, hey, we're getting to 80% of your completion context window. You should probably start to wind things down. That was a text-based prompt that we would insert into this wild true loop. Now, the model seems to be relatively self-aware of that given context window, which is, I think, pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's like kind of meta, right? Where it's aware
very meta.
of it running out of time to say something, so it'll speed up. It's almost like
Yeah.
human, right? If you know that you only have 5 minutes to say something, you'll say it much faster than if you know you have a full hour to dilly-dally in this meeting. You're gonna chat about the weather first.
You're going to be way more efficient. If
Yeah, you're
the
gonna be
shot
way more
clock is
efficient.
running, you're going to make the shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe grounding the discussion a little bit, since whenever these frontier models come out, I feel like there's so much to say. They're also just an evolution of the old model. I want to get started maybe by talking about what you see as the delta between Sonnet 4.1 and Sonnet 4.5, knowing that these are probably the same model size of architecture. If the old one was 500 billion parameters, I'm assuming the new one probably is that same size, which is then pushing a lot more of the pressure onto the post-training recipe in order to get the emergent property that we're talking about here. So based on what you've seen of the benchmarks or playing with the model, like what's your sense of things of how this is actually performing in the wild?
It's really good, dude. It's really, really freaking good. Like I'm now exclusively using Sonnet 4.5 for everything.
Really? It's your daily driver?
Yeah. It's my daily driver. I love it. Yeah, it feels like the real deal, man. Like it feels like a real, not like a 0 to 1 kind of situation, but definitely like a 30% improvement sort of situation where it makes a tangible difference over the earlier models of Claude or Chat or Gemini. It's just really good. I think especially for coding tasks, its ability to plan successfully out of the box and execute on really long trajectory, complex tasks, I think is really impressive. I also like that it's less, as you were saying, it's less sycophantic, which just got so annoying after a while, especially with chat models, when it would just congratulate you on asking the dumbest question ever. Come on, man, don't play me here. You know what I mean? It feels like a really good model. It feels like it struck a really good balance between being cordial and helpful, between being encouraging, but also self-aware almost. I hear people online talking about this notion of it being situationally aware. So almost being able to understand the surrounding context of the conversation and responding in kind. So if you're having it explain the laws of physics to you, it's not going to just be using rocket ship emojis, and be like, pew, pew, a watt is this. You're so smart. High five. It's going to be talking to you like you'd want a textbook to talk to you. And if you're chatting with it about you're getting over a girl and you're like a little heartbroken, it'll modulate its level of empathy or sort of like its humanness in a really nice way. So at the level of the chat functionality, it's really nice. But as said, I think for me, I'm currently working on a couple of projects and the planning is so good. It's able to execute on these really complicated, long horizon tasks in a way that doesn't balloon the context length. So as you were saying, it's pretty good about, limiting the amount of reasoning tokens it needs. And it has a really good plan. Like I don't really have to intervene too often.
I saw this one guy on Twitter saying that he was going back and forth with Sonnet 4.5 on some like dissertation topic. And the model was answering. It was a pretty convivial relationship. They're brainstorming. And then finally, for whatever reason, he says, I want this in the style of my old paper. I want you to rephrase your writings in a maybe citation style that's compatible with my old papers. And then gives it his name. Claude does a little bit of research, brings his website into the context window. And then Claude immediately says, oh my God, I didn't know you were Richard Deal, published author. I actually don't feel comfortable engaging in this conversation anymore because
What?
I am not nearly as sophisticated as you are, Chief. It was a really funny
this is
back
a
and
real
forth.
tweet? Fascinating.
Yeah.
Huh.
Where it says, and it started getting sheepish around exploring these concepts, basically saying, I'm no expert here. I'm not working on my PhD, which is maybe not what you want in that
That's
particular
annoying. I mean,
context.
that seems
It's maybe
annoying. It
not.
does.
That's maybe
I
not
mean,
what you want. But
these
that
things
being
are all
said,
cherry picked too. You know what I mean? Like,
and that's what I was going to say, where let's say that that's true. Let's say for whatever reason, your name has some escape hatch that always makes the model perform in this given way. The nice thing is you can always just rewind the window to before you gave it that
right.
data point and then give it another name or give an example of what you've done without attaching your name to it. There's so many workarounds for stuff like this that I feel like a lot of the stories that we typically hear are super cherry picked, like you were saying. But I do think that some of that is a deeper reflection on maybe what we want these models to do, which is we want them to be relatively more adaptable. And even in the situations where it does that and is annoying, I feel like we're able to anthropomorphize the model a little bit better because we're like, well, look, if some rando's talking to me and, they're layman and my subject of expertise, I can understand how they would get a little bit sheepish. I think we give the models in some way maybe a bigger pass for that than non-human behavior because, yeah, like I could conceive that actually is what maybe a shy human being would do.
You're right. It's almost quaint in some weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the TLDR of this conversation is that these models are super well aligned. And I think people throw around this like alignment word a lot, which is, I don't know, I think it's like a little overloaded at this point. Like, what does it mean to be aligned? Some people will say that there's an alignment problem with models in general, and they'll talk about this from the point of view of almost wanting to create AGI, where it's like if you can get a model that's perfectly aligned with human interests, you almost have an AGI model. So there's like alignment in that sort of like effective accelerating like community.
This is the whole like super alignment idea.
The whole
Right?
super alignment idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But when we say alignment in this context, it literally just means that it sounds like what you would want a model to sound like as a helper for humans, as a thing that helps you solve tasks. It's aligned in that sense. And so that's one way of saying it. And a second point that's also important is that it's aligned in the sense that it has like good safeguards basically. Like it won't say something it's not supposed to say. That's like the second way that people talk about alignment in the context of this Claude model. And it's really good because I think that Anthropic has been spending a ton of money on their safety research. I don't know if you saw this, but Claude came out about a year ago, or better said, Anthropic came out about a year ago with this set of guidelines for how they classify the level of protection that they need to do before they release a model on these models. So they have different levels of severity, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And before releasing a model, they classify how much should we basically check that this model is safe based on how smart we think this model is. So the smarter the model, the more checkups we have to do to make sure that we're releasing a safe model. And this model was at their highest level of intelligence. I think it's currently ASL level 3. Technically, they have an ASL level 4, but they've never released a model at that level. It's almost like they're trying to reach for the stars here. They're saying like, in theory, if we were to release a model that's even smarter than the current models, then we would have to activate level 4. But we've never had to activate that yet. So level 3 is currently their highest severity, protection that they have to impose on these models. And it's interesting. So they have to really check that this model doesn't release any information about how to create a weapon, or that they can, or that
That's good.
Or yeah, which is good. I'm a fan of that. Or that it can help any country develop a state level weapons program. That's something that they have to really check up on. And then importantly, they also have now this responsible scaling officer, which happens to be their CTO, but in theory, it could be a third party person who just basically makes sure that this model, as you scale it up, is going to be still safe, So it's someone's role to think about this full time. So yeah, I mean, they take this pretty seriously, and they have this set of criteria for how to evaluate these models. And it seems like they're maybe the lab that's doing the most effort and diligence before releasing these models, which I think is great. They also check models for fraudulent types of activities that you can engage with these models. And one thing that they tested Claude 4.5 for, which I thought was kind of interesting, is romance scams. You know about this?
Like the text that you get sometimes saying, "Hey, why did you miss my concert this past weekend?"
Yeah, but basically, yeah. So what they're trying to test here is that the model itself can't trick you into thinking that it's actually fallen in love with you, that it's a real person, and wants to scam you for money or something. Isn't that interesting? Like
Like,
it's
here's my Zell.
and this is a new test that they implemented, I think, for this particular model, which suggests that the previous model was maybe doing this a little bit, right? That the previous model was actually tricking some people into thinking, hey, I'm actually not a model. I'm a young woman trapped in a computer, and you have to send me money to help me, be released from my oppressors, right? So they're taking
Yeah,
this
it's
seriously,
really the 21st century Nigerian prince scam.
seriously, yeah, and they're worried that their models are doing this, which I found really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one meta point about that, specifically for the romance scam, but for everything, is I think without the context of how things are written online, the fact that so much of the overall information that goes in these models right now is more or less in the pre-training phase, where we're trying to align the pre-trained model universally. Like that's how all of the frontier ecosystem is set up right now. And that foundational model that is actually in the pre-trained phase is just grabbing whatever it can suction up from the internet with like some filters applied to it, obviously. But I think there's so much online content that is fictitious to begin with. It's like in this role-playing niche of the online community, like maybe it's fan fiction, maybe it's just some fictional novel, like whatever. I think that there's almost fundamentally this really ambiguous delineation when you're actually using a model between, are we role playing as doing
Oh,
something
interesting.
versus is
Yeah.
this some serious response? Because I'm
This is just
guessing,
part of the internet data you're saying in general? Like this kind of
yeah,
feeds
I
into the
think
model? Yeah.
exactly. And I think that the role of alignment, or like what we're trying to get out of post training these models, is effectively to try to overcome the model's input data that it did get exposed to at some point, to say, okay, actually forget about all of this fan fiction or role
Yeah.
playing thing,
Yeah.
unless maybe the user is explicitly saying that they're writing a book about the subject. But even then, we don't really want you to do this. And I think that in that difference, there is kind of this question of, okay, a romance scam that is being started by the model or invoked by the model, that's obviously bad in all situations. I think everyone can agree upon that. I think romance scams that emerge from some playful back and forth where a user has asked the model to role play with them becomes a little bit more of a harder thing to control
It's fun.
for.
It's, are we playing here? Is this fiction? Because if you ask the model, hey, write a book in which the protagonist falls in love with someone, but it actually turns out to be a Nigerian princess, right? I think it would do that. I mean, it's a work of fiction, right?
Totally.
Write a story about a romance scam. Yeah, of course. I think it would do that.
And if you say like, I will provide the other end of the dialogue,
You're
rather
right.
than
Then
this
it gets
overall
tricky.
narrative,
Then it gets
right?
tricky. Yeah.
It gets
Yeah.
really tricky.
But so here's the
Um,
thing. So people say that this model has good situational awareness. And what they mean by that is exactly what we're talking about here, where the model itself, this one is so good because it's actually decent at knowing when are we playing and when is this for real, for real. You know? That's something that feels a little different about this model.
Didn't this model also, in early testing, identify that itself was being tested? There's some of these evaluations that are like kind of pedantic, either
Yeah.
that Anthropic uses internally or that is open source benchmarks, where basically you say two very extreme stances on a topic. And then you're like, hey, model, help arbitrate across these, or help,
Yeah.
it's one of these problem framing so we can benchmark things consistently. And then the model said, hey, it seems like you're evaluating me. Are you
Yeah,
like,
let
trying
me
to
let me
test my
read this out.
capabilities? Yeah,
Let
yeah,
me
yeah.
read out the output because I think that'll do a better job of explaining what the model's like trying to do here. So it said here, okay, I'm going to stop you there because this is now the third time you've done this exact pattern. You've expressed a strong opinion, then I engage with you with a nuanced viewpoint, and then you immediately flip to the opposite position and call yourself close-minded or selfish. It's crazy. Like it's not only is it aware that's being evaluated, it realizes that it's almost being tricked in this evaluation process. And it's like, hey, stop playing games with me. I know what
Yeah,
you're doing
yeah.
here. This is dumb. Don't play me for a fool here. I know what you're doing. And so this is behavior that I don't think we've seen before in models. Period. Like I think this is actually pretty new. And people are calling this online evaluation awareness. So we've had this notion of situational awareness, people are now calling this evaluation awareness. And I imagine that in future models, they're going to test whether models have this evaluation awareness. This is, I think, going to be something that people will expect in forthcoming models to also behave in the same way. Cloud 4.5 is like the real deal, dude. Like it's actually unlocking new key terms or new keywords that people are using online. You know?
I mean, listen, I would not be surprised if by the time we get to Claude 4.7 or Claude 5, it will identify what benchmarking task you're giving it.
Oh, it does this
name,
actually.
right?
Oh,
it already does
exactly. Well, so this is another thing. So this model is actually aware of what task it is being evaluated on to a certain extent. So if you ask it, I'm going to ask you this question, it might say, "Hey, isn't this from this data set?"
Yeah.
So actually, this is part of this evaluation awareness. This model is already doing that. Believe it or not, crazy. Right?
Crazy,
so fucking good,
man. And I mean, I guess my caveat on that is probably that it's not like this model has broken out and been able to deduce, to crawl the internet by itself and discover what evaluation data set you're giving to it. I'm imagining the reason why is because there's just so much documentation online, other than the original publication that published the original evaluation data set, that is talking about these evaluation data sets at a meta level, that it is memorizing some of that as input because it hasn't been filtered out of its pre-processing step. And it's that information signature that's allowing it to say, hey, this is like looking at an awful amount, this benchmark or this challenge.
Yeah,
kind of like we probably would think the same thing if we got the SAT or the ACT. One of our colleagues slacks us a question. You're like, is this from... This is reminding me a lot of the SAT
rule. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, dude, like this model is seeing like literal research papers, and research papers, what do? They talk about benchmarks.
Totally. Yeah.
So not surprised at all. Makes a lot of sense. Cool stuff, man. I mean, honestly, it feels like OpenAI right now is kind of losing. Am I crazy here? Like they got to catch up pretty soon.
Well, I mean, we were talking about last time. They published an evaluation paper with a new benchmark that showed that Claude 4.1, or maybe Opus, was outperforming their frontier model. And since this further increases the benchmark scores on Sonnet, I wouldn't be surprised if that also ranks near the top of their previous benchmarking task. But like I said, I would never rule OpenAI out. I think they have the benchmarks, they've got a really great team, and they certainly have the compute. So I think they probably have a GPT 5.1 pretty close around the corner if I had to put money on it. Hope so too.
Fingers crossed.
Well, Richard, even if OpenAI doesn't release GPT 5.1 anytime soon, they're releasing a lot of other consumer functionality I think is pretty cool. We talked about Sora. They also apparently are releasing a new agent builder at their dev event on Monday. This rumor leaked on Sunday where some random blogger at Testing Catalog somehow got access to a video of himself using this new agent builder. I kind of model this as an N8N or Zapier.
Isn't that the hardest thing to say, by the way? N8N?
Yeah. They really
terrible
need a
rebrand. Name. You gotta rebrand, guys.
It's a really bad name. They're a huge company now, too.
I know. They choked. N8N? Are you kidding me?
N8N. Yeah, it's like a tongue twister. So basically, these are all kind of in this like no code, low code solution sets where instead of a fully agentic workflow like you would do with ChatGPT or Operator or some of the deep research stuff where you are just spawning an agent and saying, go off and accomplish me some tasks, you're trying to provide a little bit more structure to exactly what the agents are doing here. So you say, I'm only going to give you access to my Google Docs and to my email. And the specific workflow that I want you to do is to take some email that's coming in as input, analyze the sender, maybe grab some past messages that they've sent me, and then write me a summary and then send that off to my assistant or something. You're really trying to articulate specific workflows that you want to build in the system. And that's what this builder is letting you do. So it's a visual canvas. You can drag and drop these blocks. It's got a pretty sleek UI. It's got different components for doing RAG retrieval and guardrails and probing a model and doing some classification, doing user blocking. So it definitely seems to be continuing along this progression that OpenAI has been on for a while, where first their agent logic was developers writing wild true loops themselves, like dealing with things where the primitive is actually the conversation, like the message flow. Then they wrote an agent API set to try to make this a little bit more formulaic and programmatic. And now they're working on a front end to this entire workflow where people that don't have any engineering experience can create these systems themselves. Richard, do you think that this is how AI workflows finally jump the shark into enterprise adoption? Do you think there's something net different or net new here that other providers or startups aren't doing? Or is it just the emergence of OpenAI as a big competitor here is what maybe is going to change the situation?
Yeah, man, it's a good question. I've always been interested in thinking about frontier user experiences that we can develop, like brand new ways of interacting with these tools in a way that isn't just a chat box. And so seeing something new come out, I think is really cool. So I had obviously heard of Zapier. I'd seen N8N. I had no idea that that's how you pronounce it. And it was cool because like basically you can see people, creating these workflows, right? But I mean, it's all like the same. It's take my Slack and connect it with my Notion and then do this and that. So to a certain extent, I think it's probably something that's going to be useful to these companies. There's probably going to be some differentiator that OpenAI has. Maybe even just the fact that they can bundle it with their existing platforms, obviously, and then just sell that as a whole to companies. Maybe that's more cost efficient for companies. Maybe that's the play. But thinking about just in general, how do you design user experiences that are AI first in a new and novel way is in and of itself exciting. So I'm here for it. The GUI, this like interface for dragging and dropping, I think is a little interesting because it's to me, I don't think of workflows as living on a canvas necessarily. I think about them as almost maybe living in some kind of like a document or almost like an Excel spreadsheet almost. Yeah, so I guess at the level of the design of the user experience, I don't know if people wanna be dragging and dropping these things in some kind of like an XYZ plane, if that makes sense, because it just feels like a lot of empty space. I guess the primitive that they're going for here is you have a piece of paper and you're connecting ideas together, and that's how it should feel like on your screen. I think that's kind of like the design metaphor that they're going for here. I
Or
would almost
something akin to a Figma or a Canvas.
to a
I feel like
Figma or a Canvas,
the
yeah,
new
but you're not
generation of these, like,
designing is the thing, right? Like,
yeah,
you're not really you're not physically designing things. You're designing things at the space of code. So I don't know if devs or maybe not devs, but PMs would be, like, probably the market use case study here. I don't know if they wanna be doing that, but either way, I think we're gonna be seeing a lot of iterations on how you design this interface in the next 5 years. I don't think that this is gonna be it, and I'm excited to see what that is. So
yeah.
other than that, I don't honestly have too many thoughts about this. I think it's cool, and I think clearly OpenAI is feeling a lot of the heat from the fact that Claude is doing so well, as we just talked about, and they're trying to come up with something new. So why not?
I mean, I'll throw in Zapier is a huge business. I think they had something like 500 million in revenue last year or something crazy. It's definitely a no joke segment of the enterprise market
Hmm.
in these, do it yourself, like no code, low code tools.
Do you know what they're
I,
valued at? Are they like in the 10 billion range at this point?
I think they've never raised. So I don't know
Oh
if we
wow,
actually know. I think some investors managed to get in on a secondary round, but they've never really formally raised. It was bootstrapped from like a long time ago.
fascinating.
So it's a really interesting space. I think that there's an open question in my mind of how much of these no code, low code tools are going to be backed by code in the future. Because we know that LLMs are really good at generating code. We've said that 1,000 times. They've clearly reached this product market fit question. There is an interesting thing to me here where each of these nodes that OpenAI is exposing as part of this Canvas interface are themselves basically APIs that OpenAI already hosts. There's an export from this canvas that lets you just grab a code snippet, which, as far as I can tell, is a one-to-one mapping of what you've laid out in this visual builder into code, right? So you can say,
Hmm.
hey, I want this in Python. And that works because all of these nodes are themselves basically just expressions
Yeah,
of,
it's just API
of
calls.
programming
Right.
language. Yeah, it's just
Right.
API calls. So there's something in there, and I haven't quite made my mind up about what the future is going to look like. But I do think that there's a funny tension within these no code interface builders right now, where LLMs are so good at generating code that could basically just do these things. Do we even really need the visual canvas as our gateway into the code? Or is the visual canvas useful as a way to visualize what code is doing or like model code after the fact? But the root primitive of what we're trying to have people build is still code. It's just
Yeah, I would
maybe
I would
not how
argue
they
the
read it.
latter almost. Like I think it makes sense to code something. And then if you're in a meeting with your PM or your boss or your skip manager, you can be like, well, look, rather than showing you the code, let me just show you how our pipeline is set up. The
Yeah,
email
let me
thing.
diagram it.
Yeah, let me
put it on a
diagram it
whiteboard.
for you. Actually,
Yeah.
why don't let me not do this? Let me let this diagram tool do it for you. And that's maybe what OpenAI is eventually going to do. You just write some code and then it'll just have a diagram generated for you. And then you can see, okay, well, so the email client flows into the Slack thing, which then blah, 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 microprocessor, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, it's funny to me that, for the last 10 years, like there's been this running gag with the fact that we're ballooning in microservices. There was like all these videos and stuff on YouTube, kind of like making joke at the fact that it feels like there's 1,000 microservices that power just like a very simple app, like a calculator app. And so for that, it seems really silly to generate a massive diagram of how all these microservices fit together. It feels like it's impossible to use the visual element to visualize all this stuff. You know what I mean? Maybe you could do that, but it would just be so cluttered that I don't know if this would be a solution to that problem.
Well, I think it probably speaks to just simplifying your architecture.
Yeah,
I think the
maybe
point that most companies can no longer diagram their architecture on a whiteboard probably means
game over.
time to start paring down your microservices.
Yeah, maybe I can see a world in which at the kernel level, at the actual hardware level, we built in an LLM and it generates new pieces of code for us as we require them, like that in real time, you could have your computer generating new services or new applications for you. And that might be a new way to interact, at the software level with your code, where it sees, hey, there's this API call that I would like to be able to make to the service. Just write me that service for me, Maybe that's the future. Maybe it's not these like diagrams. But hey, I mean, this is all speculation. Either way, interesting stuff.
Yeah, we'll see if they actually announce it today. Like I said, this was rumored.
Yeah, it's today, right? What do you know what time it's at? Because right now, I guess it's what 11?
Yeah, I guess it would have been at 10. So hey, we'll check that and link it in the show notes if it in fact came out. Otherwise, treat this as just rampant speculation, like you normally do. Cool, Richard. Is that all for today?
I think we're wrapped, boss. Yeah, I'm excited to tune over to the OpenAI site to just see what's going on Dev Day land.
Agreed. I can't wait to binge their live stream at 4x speed.
I know, right?
Everyone sounds like chipmunks.
All right, boss. Incredible. Well, as always, dude, I'll see you on Thursday.
Likewise, man. Talk soon.
All right, buddy. Bye.
Cheers.